All right, we're back here with a little bit more about labor markets. We have a labor supply and demand graph in front of you with wages. We're on the y-axis here, and the quantity of labor measured here on the x-axis. Our supply of labor, our demand for labor. Remember, you are the supply, and now the producers demand our labor. So what is this label that we should attach here to the demand for labor curve? So the demand for labor is the marginal revenue product. When a firm is considering hiring workers, they're thinking about how much that worker can produce and multiplying that by the price, and that will equal the demand for our labor. Okay, this will give them an idea of what revenue we're going to generate. They need to know what revenue we're going to be generating for the business. And they can't pay me more, they can't be paying me more than the revenue that I generate for the business. So my wage cannot be higher than the marginal revenue product. So we can see here, this is what I was willing to work, this is what we were willing to work for. Here's the supply of labor. This is what we were willing to work for. And here's where the wage I'm willing to work for matches up with the revenue that I'm going to generate for the business. And so this is the quantity of workers that will be hired. So what's going to change, what would cause the demand for labor curve to change? What will cause this to change? So if demand for labor is marginal revenue product, it's pretty straightforward. If this is demand for labor, this marginal product or price, if price changes, that will change the demand for labor. If the productivity of the worker changes, then that would change the demand for labor. Well, it's mathematical. If our productivity multiplied by the price equals the demand for labor, then that means if either our productivity changes or the price of the product changes, then the demand for labor changes. So looking at this a little bit deeper, we think, well, what caused the change in the price of the product? Well, that's pretty straightforward. That's what we did in Unit 2 with supply and demand. Well, an increase in demand will cause an increase in the price of the product, which then causes an increase in the demand for that labor. We talked about that in the last video, that the demand for the labor is related to the product. If a product is popular and rising in demand, so will the demand for that input. Well, this is what's causing it. As the demand rises for the product, the price rises, and then that increases the demand for the labor input. There could be a change in the supply of another factor of production, a complementary factor of production. So as a business expands and purchases more capital or builds a larger factory space, that can increase the productivity of the workers. And then that would then therefore allow the factory to hire more workers. Finally, a change in technology. This one could be tricky though. We normally think of technology as increasing the demand for a factor of production, because oftentimes technology is labor augmenting, meaning it makes me more productive. If the technology makes the worker more productive, then that's going to increase the demand for that labor. However, we do have technology today that's also, and always have, that's also labor replacing. So on the balance though, we've always felt like technology has probably been more labor augmenting than it has been labor replacing. But just because something has always worked that way in the past doesn't mean it will always continue to work that way in the future. But there's lots of examples where you could see how when labor became more productive, it resulted in higher demand for those workers. Let's look a little bit at factor markets for land and for capital, in particular land here first. Let's take a farmer, and he's considering renting an additional acre of land next year. So how does he make this decision? Well, what's that land going to do? It's going to yield corn for me. Well, then I sell the corn. So it's again, the demand for the land is the marginal product of that acre times the price of that corn equals the marginal revenue product, which is the demand for the land. So it works just like demand for labor. We're also thinking of the here we're thinking the productivity of the acre of land. Even if a farmer owns the land, he's still making this decision. Why? If I own the land, there's an opportunity cost. I could rent it. What could I rent it for? So that would factor into his decision. Finally, look, are all the factors equal? Are all inputs equal? Land, labor, capital. Generally speaking, labor is the largest factor market. It's the most important factor market. Are all labor markets equal? No, somebody who probably studies labor markets they're not studying labor as a whole, but probably segments of the labor market. There's a labor market for doctors, a labor market for store clerks, a labor market for fast food workers, a labor market for teachers. So all different types of labor markets depending upon the occupation. You might be able to do some grouping within those labor markets, but not all labor markets are equal. Are all land markets equal? Clearly not. Location, 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 right? So there's a market for residential property versus commercial property. And so not all land markets would be equal as well. Not all agricultural land is equally suited. So location would matter. So finally, we're going to look at cost minimizing input combination. How does a business decide whether they want to invest in more of a labor, or do they want to go more the capital route to produce? So a farmer, hire workers, farmhands, or a tractor, or combine? A bank, ATM machine, or another teller? Walmart, self-checkout lanes, cashiers. So how do businesses make decisions of moving from labor to capital? And so here's a problem I'm going to give you. A contractor is employing labor and capital to build an office complex. At the current mix of inputs, the marginal product of labor is 30 square feet per day, and the marginal product of capital is 90 feet per square day. Looks like the capital is more productive. Should I go that route? Well, it all depends upon the price of these inputs as well, wouldn't it? So the price of labor is $1,000 per day, and the price of capital is $3,000 per day. To hire inputs, what should they do? Should they hire right now? Should they hire more workers, or should they hire more capital? What's this business to do? I want you to pause the video. I want you to set the problem up, and I want you to solve it. It's very much like what we did earlier this week with optimal consumption bundles, where we figured out utility per dollar, right? Satisfaction per dollar of the two different products. Here, I want you to calculate productivity per dollar, the marginal product of each product per dollar, and to figure out whether they ought to go the labor route or whether they ought to go the capital route. All right, hopefully you paused and you came back here. So let's look at it. We got labor and capital. So setting it up, you're taking the marginal product of labor divided by the price of labor, the marginal product of capital divided by the price of capital, plug those numbers in. Wow. Well, those two they're equal. So what do I do? Nothing. You're already cost minimizing. Neither right now, you wouldn't get more bang for the buck by hiring labor or capital because the two are equal. So you're already cost minimizing. All right. However, what if the situation had been this instead? What if the marginal product had been 100 and the price of the product had been 20, and for capital the marginal product was 200 and the price was 100? Well, here I'm getting more productivity per dollar from labor than I am from capital. If I'm getting more productivity from labor than I am from capital, well, then hire the worker instead. So whatever is going to give you more production per dollar, marginal product per dollar, that's the route that you would want to go, because that's going to help you minimize your cost as you pursue the input that gives you the largest productivity per dollar. All right, no graphing problems here for us today. Go and onto AP Classroom and go take some of the multiple choice questions that we put up there for you to practice some of these.